Saptok.
얘는 아직 있잖아 이게.
Okay. Ano era nada?
Igen, nagyon ilyen hivatalos vagy. Ismerjük, hogy rajta nem mondtunk, hogy dolgozni benne. Körülöttünk.
So it's called Westkunst, Ostkunst, and yeah, you just go on. It's art from the word was presented, but I think there's So my name is Borbála Kálmán. I am an art historian and a curator in Ludwig Museum Budapest. The Ludwig Museum Budapest is located in the Palace of Arts, where we are sitting now. So the Palace of Arts embraces also concert halls, but the big Ludwig Museum, which managed to move from its original location, which was in the castle of Buda, and it's located in the Palace of Arts since 10 years now, more than 10 years actually. And the Ludwig Museum was founded in 1989, about half a year before the fall of the Berlin Wall, so it has a very interesting story. Ludwig Museum has now today 3 floors, which wasn't always the case, because when it was located in its original place at the National Gallery, it was a much complex place, and it wasn't really suited for the mission of the Ludwig Museum, which is to represent contemporary art. So the Ludwig Museum is only focusing on contemporary art, and the story of its birth is interesting because it is based on one part of the collection of the Ludwig couple. So Peter and Irene Ludwig were private collectioners after the Second World War, and they started to gather a huge collection of American pop art, and then further on during the 60s, 70s, 80s they developed their collection and created one of the biggest contemporary collections, contemporary art collections in Europe and also in the world. So it's and today there are about 17 Ludwig collections around the world in different structures. So Ludwig Museum is at the same time based on this a part of this collection, which was a donation to the Hungarian state, and we are a state museum. So basically we have a very exciting mission altogether, and we are focusing mostly on of course Hungarian contemporary art, but also the most progressive and interesting contemporary tendencies of the region, so which would be Central and Eastern Europe. Of course, however, we are open to all international collaborations, and it's also our mission to bring international art to Hungary and to represent contemporary Hungarian art abroad. And we have a collection. We have a very interesting collection of about 800 works, and these are it's the biggest international contemporary art collection in Hungary. So because we have thanks to the Ludwig couple, and also to our collecting program since more than 25 years, it has developed to be a very interesting collection. So we are presenting partly this collection in our museum, but also we are having temporary exhibitions, which means collaborating with many artists all around the world. Since the Ludwig Museum is so the Ludwig Museum is because it was partly founded by the Ludwig couple. It also wants to continue the mission of this couple, so creating of art an international communication language, if I may say so, in a very complex way. So we are really trying to open up art to the biggest audience possible. So for us, the target, I would say, is everybody who is open about art. We try to be also a research center, so in a way we have exhibitions which are more dedicated to the profession, I would say. So because so many of our exhibitions are made after a long time of research. These researches are reflected by these exhibitions, but we also are very keen on having exhibitions which are, let's say, pushing the boundaries towards different disciplines and interdisciplines. For example, this year or last year we had exhibitions connected with music, and we are trying to, especially through our programs, because we have multi-layered programs which are targeting from the youngest generations to museum pedagogy programs to all ages, because we have, I don't know, tea time with people who have more time and wants to have a calm cup of tea within the exhibitions. We have very boosting programs where we have concerts, we have competitions, we have all these kind of things. So we are trying to remain very creative on how we are targeting our audience. I think about 50 people work in Ludwig Museum, all staff together. It's a number which is always a little bit moving, because I mean, it's also connected to the needs of the museum. But we have a very complex structure in a way that we have, so the exhibition and collection department, we have conservation and collection care department, so we work with a laboratory of conservators, and we have the museum pedagogy, we have the communication department. So we work with many departments, so it's a very big team, but very let's say working very intensely together, as we have 3 floors, which means usually 3 exhibitions. It's quite well, it's quite a big challenge, and usually, well, because it's of a state museum and because it's a Hungarian state museum, I mean, Hungarian is not spoken by so many people. Unfortunately, we have to, most of our stuff is Hungarian. I mean, it's not unfortunately, but most of our stuff is Hungarian, but we try to remain open, and we welcome foreigner interns, for example. So so depending on the program we have, exhibition program we have, or because we organize conferences like MAPS, which is about media technology and media art preservation. So for our international programs, we try to have interns who also can help us and connect to other places. But I must say it's not easy, but we're trying to do our best to remain open also on this field. As an art historian and curator in the museum, I would say that the most interesting part of my work is that every day is different, I would say. So it's always depending on the schedule of an exhibition. So I work, so if there is so I also collaborate in researches for specific exhibitions, or I work as as a researcher. I mean, how should I put it? So there's this research part which is always depending on the topic of the exhibition, but so this is mostly the art historian part. And technically I work a lot on because some museums have specific department for organizing exhibitions. I mean, just only the technical part. In our museum, the tradition is that it stays quite in one hand. So I mean, as one curator would have rather a little team around, but one exhibition stays in one hand, because we believe it's also a good way to I mean, it remains more flexible. So for example, for many exhibitions, I supervise technically all the parts of the exhibition, coordinate the technical matters, which is not always easy, so I learn a lot too. So I'm theoretically and practically always involved in these exhibitions, and this also means that well, I, I have very different tasks to do, but until now I always worked on not always, but mainly on foreign exhibitions. So I speak also French and English. So I mean, this also helps to be involved in these exhibitions. Yeah. You just go on. It's art from the. So one part of my research field will be about institutions actually, and the role of the museums, and especially how museums. I mean, the concept of a museum, I think, basically is very very connected to kind of. Well, so one would say Euro-American, one would say Westernized, one would say, so there are many concepts, I mean, many words who may describe this kind of very strict set of museums which developed in the 19th century and later on in the 20th century. And it's not only the digital age which made change the museum, but also the fact that many new regions who had not the traditions to have museums have now extremely interesting art scenes, and these art scenes also need some kind of infrastructure, and it's always a question: is it the museum which is the best infrastructure, or what? I think every art scene has its own needs, and it's the museum. However, we still call it museums, but the museum institutions have to also adapt to the needs of what the art scene requires, because I believe that a very static institution is not always the best way to serve art. However, I think there are many aspects that a museum can provide, and which is a help for the art scene. For example, preservation. So I think preservation and also digital preservation, which is a new question, and today it's very much very much interesting topic to talk about, is that how the media used for the past 20 years, how can it be, or 20, 30, even sometimes 40 years, how can it be preserved when it's always changing and always new technology comes, and artists are using so many technologies that it's very difficult to, if you are taking a collection, it's very difficult to take care of these material. So so that's one aspect, but also, I mean, technically, an art historian is not anymore, bind it to books. An art historian, as me, if I want to organize an exhibition, I have to also be aware of many kind of technologies, which is absolutely not obvious. So it's always a learning process and always a changing process. I think the role of the museum in this aspect is to remain open to. It's always a challenge to rethink its role, and it has to rethink its role. However, I believe that the original roles of museum has to be also kept, because if we talk about museum, I mean, we can talk about other type of infrastructure, but a museum, to remain a museum, has certain aspects to stay loyal to, but these aspects have to be also flexible to embrace what it means. But I think it cannot work without the artists, because the artists also, many artists have criticized the institution, and this has, created I think there is already this dialogue, so it's possible. And many other new type of institutions become type of museum types. So many galleries try to be museum types. So museums are trying not to be so closed, and galleries try to provide technology and display aspects which are more close to a museum. So I think it's a stage where there are many changes, and but it's always an experience. So I don't think there's one set of frame which is the only good working one. I would say that so many of the exhibitions we do are more and more interactive. So it's of course some artists, depending on the art and the artist we are exhibiting, or the exhibitions. It's becoming, there are more and more, of course, multimedia which is exhibited, and a lot of installations. So the aspects of only having very very simple works, like you put out a painting and it's there, you put out a sculpture, it's there. It's over now for many of these exhibitions, and this also means that the visitors are I think the visitors who come to a contemporary art museum expect the exhibitions to be, actually we make some surveys, and this is also the reaction we get, that if I'm not wrong, that many of the visitors were quite satisfied with the fact that our exhibitions are energetic and dynamic in a way that it gives experience, and experience in a way that the visitor not only goes out with visual experience, but it touches also the other senses. So I think it has to visiting one exhibition is, many of the visitors would expect to be touched really deeply in one way, and also our communication department works a lot on being able to provide information on many platforms. So we also try to remain very progressive on these communications forms, so to be able to always produce some interesting content. We have, for example, a blog where we tend to put background information, interviews, some very small just little small details, which I think are very interesting, because it shows how complex the life of a museum is. And I think reading about the works, so I think it depends on the visitor. I myself, I like when there is thorough information about the artists and artwork, but maybe it's because I'm a professional. So sometimes we try to play on that fact that sometimes exhibitions have a lot of information on the walls and on the labels, so we try to be very precise on this part. But also we tend to provide digital content in a way that, for example, for our pop art exhibition, we made a special website where many of the works had QR codes, and you could connect through the QR codes, and you had access to tons of information, videos, musics, which were connected to one specific work. Or we also have extra content. For example, we had now a cooperation with an application company which made guides. So an application which is provides a guided tour, an audio guided tour for the exhibition. So it's a possibility that if you want to have received more information, you don't have to these very let's say I could say old-fashioned audio guides, but it's a new way because it's a mobile application, so you can download it and you only have access to the amount of information you want. So I think with these we try to reach out for different people. So some people prefer traditional museums, so we try to consider all these facts. So considering 2017, we have a busy summer because we will open our new permanent exhibition. So for our permanent exhibitions, it's a semi-permanent, so we change it every 2 years to be able to show more aspects of our collection. Then we open one exhibition of Gilbert and George, so it will be there. It's a famous artist couple from the UK, and they will present their latest works, which is a very big honor for us because they are big figures of contemporary art, of recent contemporary art. And then we also have an exhibition presenting a Hungarian artist group, which was mainly active in the end of the 80s, beginning of 90s, which was in Hungarian art a crucial period of change. So this will be summer, and then in the autumn we will have a Fluxus exhibition presenting a private collection, but it will only remain about Fluxus. It's a very, very fascinating period, and we will also move on with our we have an open application which is now closed, but there was application about collaborative arts project. So it's also a fascinating project because we will present 7 different projects which are created especially in this international program called CAPP. Yeah, I mean, and next year will be also, well, we always remain, we also always try to combine exhibitions which are not discovering but opening up layers of Hungarian contemporary art which were not yet presented in an extensive and comprehensive way, and while always bringing some progressive tendencies too. So it's always a combination of the two which gives the dynamic of the museum. When I started when I started my art history studies, it was it was all about research and books and previous periods. And when I finished my studies, I mean, we had some contemporary art lectures and courses, but I must tell that I learned more about that later on in practice when I was working first in a private gallery. So working together with contemporary artists is completely different than researching art history of previous periods, because the artist is there, the work is there, and it's you access to very practical information, which is also developing your thought about, nothing is always, not everything is about always theory. So you have, sometimes very practical things can also help. And understanding art is, I think it was crucial for me to have the possibility to work together with artists in a very active form, because it taught me a lot about the visions artists have, and I think one of the most important things I learned is to remain loyal to art in a way that so in exhibitions or when you organize big things, sometimes you just forget where your original point of the exhibition was, and that always has to be there to be able to understand and to convey truly and loyally what the artist wants to convey, because otherwise, and that also taught me about for curating works or curating exhibitions, it's I think art has to have the primer let's say role in that, and then comes the role the role of the curator. I think I have to think who said recently to me that there is no art without the artist. So this is and there's no curator without the artist. So I think these sentences are very important, and I think art taught also to me to be more, remain very open and be very empathic in a way, because you need to understand to the very deepest point things other people thinking, to be able to talk about it and to open a dialogue, because I think exhibitions are also a way to dialogue, to open discussions about very problematic or beautiful or not interesting, or I don't know, things that matter around us, and it's our environment, and it's a form of dialogue. But I think a dialogue can always work if you also try to understand the other people's opinion and other people's view of the world, which teaches us. Every day I learn something very deep. So I think that's also the reason why I remain in this discipline, which is not always easy.
quasi eine ziemlich große Straße.
Is he friendly? Yeah?
if you don't know, it's not your fault, it's our fault. Absolutely the same tiling. Yes, of course they bought it from us. Of the Matthias Church. However, it's not so cheap. An old but a very funny story came to mind. Up in the tower and you're having a flat there. Weird Hungarian youngsters having secret drum and bass.
Köszönöm.